be available. It will be available to anybody after the event. And of course, we share it up on LinkedIn and whatever. So, okay, let's kick off and get started. New team dynamics, challenge for today's manager. So I suppose the first thing I'd like to do is welcome Tricia, our guest speaker today. And I'll be introducing Tricia in just a second. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Pádraig Berry. I'm the CEO of TTI Success Insights here in Ireland. And as I said, Tricia is my co-host today. She's the guru, the expert, who's going to be helping us with this whole thing of team dynamics, particularly team dynamics in this new time that we're living in. Tricia, just before I say, anybody has any questions as we go through this, just pop them into the chat, and you can send them to me or send them to everybody, it doesn't really matter. Pop them in the chat, and if I think it's appropriate, I'll be moderating this. If I think it's appropriate to actually address the question as we're going through the webinar, I'll put the question to Tricia. Otherwise, we'll address them at the end. So let me just introduce Tricia. Tricia has over 20 years experience. I actually know Tricia for a long, long time. I know you since the first time I started working with Century Management, which used to be the TTI franchisee here in Ireland. And that's back in 1995, Tricia, when I started working with them. So I don't know at what stage you got involved and I got to know you, but certainly a long, long time ago.
Yeah, about 98, 99.
Yeah, I remember. So I remember when you were working with Century, with TTI. So you were over about 20, 25 years in training and development. And I know you've worked across like a lot of sectors and organizations, both here and in the US. And we had a chat earlier while we were waiting for everybody to show up. We had a chat about our US experiences. But Tricia, one thing that I've always found interesting about Tricia is she's really into what are we trying to accomplish. And that's why I'm going to look forward to the webinar today. When she works with clients, it's really all about what are we trying to accomplish, trying to really understand the client, really understand what the engagement is all about. So that what she does real impact, not as opposed to just delivering a program. I mean, Leap Leadership is really all about this concept of understanding and having a real impact. I was talking to somebody the other day and he said to me, are you making a dent in the universe? And Tricia popped to mind. And I thought, well, I'm not sure I am making a dent in the universe, but there you go. So I think you've got if I'm right, Tricia, you have a master's degree in training and development. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, from Lesley College in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Ah, okay. Well, I didn't know it was from the States. Very good.
Yeah.
So you got that in the States. But you're based in Galway, Leap are based in Galway. And since what? About 2000 you've been working?
2000.
Yeah, about 2000. And working with, I know you actually work with a lot of large organizations down there, actually. And one of two of them actually I've done a bit of work with as well with you. And so you're a QQI approved centre since 2008, if I'm correct?
That's correct, Corey. Yeah.
And you provide programs at level 5 and level 6 in management, team development, and whatever. Okay. So is there anything you want to say, Tricia, before I kick off? Anything you want to say? Just say a little quick hello to everyone.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you. And I look forward to this webinar this morning. And certainly Pádraig has put great expectations. So I better deliver on that now this morning. Thank you for that introduction, Pádraig. I didn't even nearly recognize myself in it, but thank you. That's wonderful.
You're more than welcome. I have huge confidence in Tricia, so I'm sure we're going to get something really interesting here. Okay, so let's talk about the session objectives. I mean, Tricia's told me, and I'm going to be reading a little bit here now, because this is what Tricia's told me she's going to be doing. She's going to be talking about the difference between a team and a group of individuals. And she's going to talk about how do we find ways for team members to work together effectively, not just as individual contributors. And I know actually from working with Tricia, this is really what you're all about, isn't it? And this team dynamic and getting people to work as teams rather than individuals. And it's interesting. One of the things I think that I like about this particular timing, if you wish, is that right now people are working very differently. Some are working together, some are working hybrid, some are working remotely. And we've done a lot of work over the last year or two with remote teams. And we know that managers are struggling to create strong teams in this environment. They really are, genuine. This is not just us in our little bubble talking about this because we want it to be this way, because it actually is this way. They are really struggling. And I was talking to a group of people the other day who've never been in the office. Like they've been working with the company for a year and a half and they've never been in the office, not once. So this is really interesting. So it's hard to manage teams now, I mean, more than ever. So the question is, has what motivated team members shifted? Yeah, it has, especially because the last 2 years, we know this great resignation is really a great churn. It's people asking questions about what do I want to do and looking for new opportunities. And managers need to understand this, not fight it, they need to facilitate it. And Tricia tells me that there are ways of doing this, and she's going to look at this, at the challenges team face and in this new environment and how to overcome them, and how managers really need to listen, observe, understand what's driving employees and go with it. So Tricia, just before we start, Tricia, I'm going to throw up, if that's okay with you, I'm going to throw up a poll. So I have 2 polls today, and I want to throw up a poll for you. And it's a really simple poll. And it says, how are your teams working? So right now, just how are your teams working? Are they working together in one place? Are you working in one place? Just your own team, not your clients, just your own team. Are you working in one place physically? Are you working hybridly, or are you working remotely? 1, I just want to get a sense of it. And 2, if you have a hybrid or a remote model, how has it impacted the way you work and your team dynamic? No difference, worse, better. And then if you have specific strategies in place, do you have them to address these team dynamics, yes or no? So that's really, but yes, sort of, and no. So three questions. Okay, so how are we getting here? Okay, yeah, the scores are popping up here. Okay, so so far there is, again, I have nobody working together. I'll pop up the results in a moment, but nobody working in one physical space. It's really nobody. Of the people who responded, nobody. We have 40% of working hybrids. Well, actually, that was 30% to 70% working remotely. Hybrid model, no difference, worse, better. So no difference, 43%, worse, 43%, better, 14%. Specific strategies, yes, 14%, sort of 57%, and no, 29%. Okay, has everybody answered? No, I've only got 7 of 11. So anybody who hasn't answered, just answer there for me if you would quickly, and I just end the poll and put up the results. But it's interesting to see this. So I've now got 8 of 11, 3 people to go. Who are you? The 3 of you. Okay, I'm going to pop up, I'm going to end the poll, I'm going to pop up the results. Okay, I'll pop it up there. Share the results. So here you see the results. And so actually, I'm going to just bear with me just 1 second. I've muted everybody, and I'm going to unmute. You might unmute yourself there, Tricia. Yeah, I've muted everybody else. Okay, I've muted everybody else because there was some background noise coming in there. Okay, so the results. How are our teams working? Okay, here's an interesting one, Tricia. Any surprises? Nobody's working together.
Yeah. That's not a surprise, Porrick. That's what we're seeing right across in different sectors as well. And when you think about it, in such a short length of time, just over 2 years, how different our world has changed. I mean, if you had conducted this poll 2.5 years ago, people would have been asking, what is a hybrid model? And working remotely, oh, no way, it couldn't be possible. It isn't. But in that short length of time, look what's happened. And this obviously then throws up issues with regard to how we work and how we can pull people together, etc. So I'm not surprised with the results at all.
Yes, 75%. Now we're a special group in the sense here that a lot of us are working independently. There are a load of big teams or whatever, but even still, it's a very, very high figure. If you have a hybrid or remote model, how has it impacted team dynamic in term and performance? No difference, 50%, worse 38%, better 13%. Any comments there, Tricia?
Now, again, Porrick, I would say it's not a huge surprise. The worst part will be really interesting to delve if, had time permitted, but it is really interesting to delve behind what's creating and influencing this so that it is worse for many people. There can be some of the things that we're going to talk about here this morning, some of the challenges that I'll reference in the next slide. I think they will tap into why people are experiencing it as worse. Yeah, but it's great to see that some people are seeing it as better. So how do you leverage that? How do you really maximize that further? That's the important thing. And sometimes it's about stopping for a moment, hitting that lovely pause button, stopping for a moment and saying, why is it better? What is happening? And what can I do to keep that going? And hopefully today you'll get to share your insights as well, so others can learn. How come you've made it better? What could I take on board? And they're usually little things. That's the good thing that we're talking about today. They're small things that make the big difference. It's not something dramatic or huge that you have to do, but it's the culmination of all these small steps that will result in that better experience.
And what's interesting, the third question, Tricia, have you put specific strategies in place? 13% said yes. I'm sure that's the same 13% who are saying better. But anyway, it is interesting. It's just a quick little thing to engage everybody, but also to get a sense of where we are in this. So now I'm going to hand over to you, Tricia, if that's okay. The floor is yours, and here we go. The challenges facing teams today.
Great, excellent. Thanks, Porrick. And you know what you identified there, as I said, I think it's linking in with what we're discovering in our work with clients and the challenges they're facing. This survey was done by Gallup back in 2018, so I know it's pre-pandemic, and I know it's an American context, not in the Irish context, but even there, 53% of US workers were disengaged. And we know disengagement is a huge issue because, of course, we see it in terms of lower productivity, absenteeism, staff turnover, etc. So it is a big issue. And if you say, but in Ireland, it's different. So we might say, okay, well, cut that in half. But that still is about 25%. That's 1 in 4 people being disengaged. That's a concern. And that concern hasn't gone away. So it still remains an issue that's impacting on team performance. What we're also noticing is the instability in teams with regard to staff turnover. And that is, again, something that we have to keep an eye on. Surprisingly, considering that we're still, we're at hopefully the end of COVID, but our unemployment rate is at 7%. That's if you include those who have been on the PUP, etc. So 7% is still quite low. Some of us are mature enough in this room, or if you can join me here, that we remember the 70s and the 80s when unemployment rate was so high. Indeed, I remember my 3rd year of college and our student rep coming in and saying, let's face it, some of you will never work your entire lives. And that was said to us at that particular time. So unemployment rate is really high. Even in a pandemic, our unemployment rate is still quite low at the 7%. And this, of course, has got impact because when you have staff turnover, where do you hire from? Where is the pool? So a challenge then is trying to retain staff that who are engaged, who want to contribute, and who want to be productive. The other issues that we're facing and we're encountering with groups is around information silos. Because we're working in the hybrid or working remotely, we are encountering situations where we have people who've got the sense of, this is my space, this is my area, and there's less of the interaction and that casual interaction you had before, where information was shared and picked up in a gentle, casual way, but very, very helpful. We're also seeing that people are really focused in terms of more the short-term thinking rather than the longer term. And this is generating issues because a sense of, well, where are we going? What are we working towards? Will this be realistic? Will we achieve this? This is impacting on people's satisfaction and obviously then in terms of productivity. Linked to that, what we're also seeing is a sense of unclear goals. People being reluctant to nail down what exactly is it that we're aiming for, what exactly is the goal, because things have changed. And we've had to react and respond in very difficult times. And finally, and something that's an old chestnut really, has been around the whole area of personality clashes. But in this environment, they tend to be a little hardened because it's easier not to address them. It's easier to be a little remote. But of course, I'm sure all of you can relate to that and say, well, it might be easier to not address them, but the impact of them is very significant.
It's interesting, Tricia. I'm just going to go back up one, shifting on clear goals, and as the world keeps changing. I read a really good article the other day about this, and the guy was making the point that we seem to be having these once in a century or once in a decade or whatever events happening every other week. And we had COVID, or we Brexit, we COVID, and now we've the war in Ukraine, and before that, of course, with the economic meltdown and so on. And that there's a real sense of, he was making the point that people are stressed and they don't realize it. That this rapid change is sort of unprecedented for them, and they just don't realize that they're experiencing stress, and teams don't realize that this is going on. Everybody thinks everything is fine, but it's not. They're feeling, oh my God, what's coming next? And even the threat of a nuclear error, let's call it, or mistake, right now is very, very real. So it is. So I think, so it's interesting, and I think even right today, the challenges are even more extreme than normal. So this is interesting. Okay.
Yeah, well, we are talking about teams. So some of you will recognize here this team. So very often we refer to sports because it's out there. We can all see. We can all know about it to some degree. And don't worry, this session is not going to be all about team sports, etc. It's not going to be about sports. But you might recognize this photograph. It was taken some time ago. Was the Irish team, of course, when we were heading off to Saipan with great expectations of what was going to happen. So who's missing from the picture? Who's not there? Guesses? Anybody want to guess? Yes, thank you, Michael. Yes, Roy is missing from the picture. And of course, Roy Keane was such an important player because he was the most experienced. He was the captain of Manchester United, the most successful soccer team. And we also had a team that was made up of, which was really interesting. We had a team that was made up of very experienced players, like number 5 over there on the left-hand side of your screen, Steve Staunton, very experienced, but he was coming toward the end of his career, like Niall Quinn was coming to the end of his. And then we had the other end of it. We had number 10 there, fresh-faced Robbie Keane, or indeed number 1, Shay Given. And look at Damien Duff over there. Wow, fresh faces, keen, interested, wanting to go. So we had the two extremes coming together on the team to play for Ireland. And now the one person who could probably bring it all together, Roy Keane, we know what happened. He left. He was gone. But how come we ended up with our most experienced person gone? We've got the experienced and we've got the newer ones. And we weren't meant to do much. And you look at us on paper, you added up all of these, we would have said, we're out of here. And in fact, some of you might remember when the matches were happening. I know that here in Galway, O'Connor's, who rent out visual equipment like TVs and screens, etc., they were run off their feet because companies started saying, hey, we're going to be out of it after this match. So let's put up the screen, let's have it for people. And so they rented in screens and pizzas and people had it. And we said, yay, because we were expected to be gone. And yet we didn't. We got to the last 16. So how do you think we got to the last 16 in that situation? What happened, do you think? Any suggestions from anybody here? And don't be shy. Any suggestions?
They pulled together more strongly because they didn't expect to get anywhere.
Excellent. Yes, Teresa, they did pull together. And the word we use in this environment is synergy. They were able to find a way to create that synergy, to deliver more than the sum of their parts. And isn't that, in a sense, what we're trying to achieve within our teams? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that every single day it's going to be deliver more than, and we pull everything out from the team. But when it's required that the team, as Teresa pointed out, can pull together and somehow deliver that little extra, just deliver that little bit more. That's what our aim is. That's what we're trying to do. They delivered on it. They delivered more than the sum of the parts. This is the last reference to sport, by the way.
Tricia, just before you go into this slide, you know about the Sky racing team, push bike racing team. You know about his 1% idea. His 1%, like he kept want to find these 1%, the 1%, the 1%, the 1%. And of course, they dominated that sport for a few years as a consequence, right down to having people bringing their own pillows with them so they could get a night's sleep. And it's all about the 1%. And I think this thing of this synergy really is about 1%. And it's about all these little things that you talk about. Sorry, I interrupted you. Continue. Yeah.
And it was similar with the rowing teams in the past as well, that 1% and what they did, etc. So, we're talking here about teams, and yet we haven't mentioned exactly how would we define teamwork? Like, how do we recognize it? Because I talked earlier on saying that people operating in silos. So sometimes we've a tendency to say we're a team, when we're not actually a team. We're just a group of individuals. So what's the difference? What's the difference between a group of individuals and a team? So how would you define it? Well, let's look at nature. Nature can also help us. So here we have our wild Canadian geese, and they travel a huge distance. They go from Canada right down to the US. So anybody like to take from Mother Nature? Would anybody like to kind of take a look at the picture here and say, what do we notice about the way in which they function, the way they work together as a team? What do you spot?
They take
Tricia,
turns.
you're on a roll today. Come on.
They take turns on when leading. When the leader gets tired, just moves back and the formation just retains it. Another person takes the role.
Excellent, excellent. The birds do that because, of course, the bird out in front is getting the full blast of the wind. They take up to 70% of that pressure of the wind. So, of course, after a while, they're going to get tired and they're going to move back. Isn't that what happens in our business world? We have a leader out there, but after a while, fresh, new insights, new direction is required. And so that we move and we change roles. Excellent. Anything else we notice about them?
But Tricia, I'm going to offer something here because I'm a runner, as you know, and there was a sub 2 hour marathon completed there a year ago, or less than a year ago. And the formation, the way they ran it in a loop, and they had everything marked out, the pacing marked out, the camera that marked out the pace for the pacers. But what's interesting about it is the pacers were in a particular shape, just like that. They've identified a particular shape, facilitates the people behind. It actually creates, breaks up the air, as you say, breaks up the air, but creates this almost like a little vacuum, creates a space that pulls the person along behind. So he was right there. If you see that there, he actually was positioned right there, the runner, the guy who did the sub 2 hour, right there. And the pacers were in that shape around him, creating that air flow to pull him along to help him.
Right. And then he could take the opportunity and go forward. Excellent. Yeah. And that shape that they have, that V formation that they have there, you know, it's deliberately done in that V because the birds, the position of their eyes, are actually able to see their colleagues. They're able to see the others. And that's, again, important in our teams, is that visibility. What's going on? What's happening? What are people doing? So I feel the comfort and the strength of others around me. And also, too, the birds, they honk very loudly. They're really loud birds. And the reason for that, of course, is to motivate each other, to push each other on. And that's what we do with our teams. We have our meetings to talk about what are you doing, how are you doing, how are you getting along, what's happening here. Those team meetings, those sessions with communication is happening, very important within teams. And finally, with regard to our birds here, if one of the birds gets tired or gets injured, they never leave them alone. Another bird will drop to the ground with them to support them. Now, we do that in our workplaces as well, because if somebody's not working effectively, try and find solutions. So we might buddy them up with somebody, we might put them on training and development, we might put them on a project, we do something, we might monitor them on a regular basis, more regular basis than normal. So we support them. The birds do it as well. There's a lot we can learn from nature. There's a lot we can learn from sports that we can actually apply in our own workplace. The way I like to define teamwork, a high-performing team, the high-performing teams get the right things done. That's about having focus. How clear is the team with regard to what they have to achieve? You might think it's clear, the manager might think it's clear, do the team members know what it's clear?
Yeah.
Then it's doing it as easily as possible. We want to make things, streamline things. We want to make things as easy for people to do, to achieve, because we are about achieving results. And we need to do this to the required standard. That's about effectiveness, and do this consistently.
Yeah.
Is there any aspect of that statement there that you'd kind of question, by the way, just before we go on to the next one? Any aspect of it that you'd question or disagree with? That's fine.
I like it. I have to say I like the it's a nice tight definition you have there. I don't know where you got it, but it's a really nice. Is it your own?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just from the years of working with teams, you know, what is it about? And, you know, sometimes we used to have before, like, to the best standard. And then we said, hang on a second. Organizations determine what their standards are. And tell me an organization that says, you know, our standards are really pretty crappy, but you know what, we're really proud of it. Of course they put the best standards. But if we define it as the best standards, it sometimes gives leeway for people who are the perfectionists. So instead of achieving where we need to be here, they're all the time aiming for here, and opportunities are missed, or the time that's spent here, we're not doing other things. So if your organization has defined what the standards are, they're obviously the best for your organization, and that's what we aim for.
Yeah.
So I do like it because there's 4 key elements to it. It's about focus, efficiency, effectiveness, consistently.
Yeah.
And they're easy to remember.
Yeah, they are. No, it's very good. I like that one, Tricia. Okay.
So once we understand, okay, if that's our definition of teamwork, we need to understand, how do the teams need to perform or work together? This was the results from Google, who spent 2 years studying teams, how they tend to work. They called it Project Aristotle, and they had a dedicated team looking at teams within Google. And the 3 arrows on the right will be very familiar to you. It won't surprise you that, yeah, people need to feel their work is important, absolutely, and that there's a level of meaning. They also need to have those clear goals that we talked about. But the interesting 2, and I think the 2 that are most challenging for managers, are the next 2. You know, where there's the whole level of, I need to feel within my team that I can depend on others, that we can work together and depend on. That takes a lot to get to that point. And that's a challenge for managers. How do I create that environment for people to be able to work effectively together, that they can rely on each other, that there's a sense of that, you have my back. Creating that environment is a challenge. And I suppose the other challenge for people is that psychological safety, creating that environment. And I'm just in terms of the understanding of it, Amy Edmondson has done some really wonderful work on this concept of psychological safety. And I would encourage you that if you are interested in this topic, she has some short video clips on TED Talks that are really interesting on her studies on this area and the results that it can generate. So we've got to create an environment where people can feel that sense of trust, that people can feel that sense of, you know, I can put my head above the parapet, because this is what it will yield for you if we do so. If we create that environment where people can feel safe, that I can say something, I can put my head up there. Obviously, it's going to encourage that moderate risk taking. Just so that you see there with regard to Alex there.
Yeah, let me ask a question. Is everybody seeing the slides okay?
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Alex, it just seems to be you. Okay. Continue on, Tricia.
Okay, moderate risk taking. And isn't that what we need in organizations? If you look at an organization like Twitter, it defied everything. At the time before Twitter was created, everybody was looking for, how do we get more information out there? And they went the opposite way. They took a massive risk and said, no, we're going to actually reduce it down. Messages have to be short and concise. Many thought that'll never work, that'll never take off. They took the risk, and look at it today. And okay, that's a very big organization and massive, and they only come around once every whatever. So you might look at within your own organization, within your own space, you know, do you need your teams to take that little bit of a risk? That little bit of a, what is it? And that's why it's moderate risk taking allows for. It allows for people to be able to speak their mind. And of course, when people speak their mind, we get issues out on the table. We also get new things out on the table. We get new opportunities. We can see things differently. It obviously stimulates creativity as well, because if we're bouncing ideas on what can happen, because all of us feel free that we can contribute and speak our minds, well, then it'll generate that creativity. And please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's create an environment where we all sit around holding hands and singing Kumbaya together. It's around doing it in a way that's structured and focused for what you need to achieve. And of course, it is about ultimately being able to stick your neck out without fear of it being cut off. That's what it allows for and facilitates. So the question should be then, how do you create this? And again, this is Amy Edmondson's work, talking about, okay, creating psychological safety within my team. And I would encourage you, if you're working with teams, maybe to look at these questions with them and look beyond the kind of superficial, the general, yeah, tick, yeah, this is fine. These are really easy. If you dig deep behind these questions, they're actually quite thought-provoking. So if you look at that question, for example, is it safe to take a risk on this team? Your initial response might be, absolutely, of course it is. Well, then think about it. When was the last time somebody did take a risk?
What happened?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was it? What were the results? What was the response, even if if the risk was crazy and you couldn't do? How was it managed? How do people respond to that? Was it slapped down? Was it discussed? Was it appreciated? What happened? So consider these questions and consider them deeply before you kind of just tick them off as, yeah, that's fine, that's easy. I think they're very powerful. I'm wondering what others would think of these questions and how you might respond to them with your teams, either teams that you might be working with or teams that you're working in, that you're a part of. Any comments from anybody?
I was just going to add, I think in kind of time sensitive environments, that voice of dissent can feel like an inconvenience. It can feel like it's slowing the team down, and then you can feel a collective, oh, they're on their hobby horse again, or they're, you know, so it's, I think it's really important that with the speed of work and how little fat there is in systems working virtually, that somewhere that dissent can bubble up collaboratively and productively.
It's a really good point, Ina, really good point. And it reminds me of, you know, because we are working in that really, really time pressured, really fast paced environment. You know, the whole saying that Mahatma Gandhi was asked by a very busy businessman, very successful one, and he was looking at Mahatma Gandhi and saying, gosh, he's so at peace with himself, etc. So he was asking about meditation and said, how much should I meditate a day? Because I want to reach this. And Mahatma Gandhi responded and said, an hour a day. And the businessman went, you've got to be kidding me. Well, he wouldn't have used that language, but basically, you've got to be kidding me. How am I meant to do that? An hour a day, I'm far too busy. And of course, how did Mahatma Gandhi respond? That's why you need to do 2 hours.
Well, you know my joke. I'll tell you my one, Tricia, and I like it. Martin Luther is in his chapel praying, and eventually, after half an hour, 45 minutes, he comes out, and his secretary, who's been pacing up and down outside with a big long list, furiously, that thanks be to God, you're finished. Look at all the lists of things that we need to do today. All the people waiting. Oh. Martin said, which in that case, I need to go back in and do another half hour. but I think Ina's actually point there is a really, really good point. I have to say that it resonated with me. I don't know how often I've been chairing a meeting and somebody interrupts it and takes us a task about something. And I just say, oh, for heaven's sake, we've got 30 minutes here. We got to make a decision. We got to move on. We don't have time for this. Things are really, really, and it happens so simply. And particularly if you have people like me, like the high D kind of people who are leading, if they're leading the charge, they've no patience, of course. They want to move on. They want to get a decision quickly, and they don't want to spend the time challenging things. So I think it's a really, really valuable point. Thank you, Ina.
Yeah, I do. And I think in relation to these questions, I think if you could think about which question within my team could we easily address that would have a positive impact? That becomes your focus. Or which one is having this most significant impact that we really do need to address? And even opening up the discussion within the team around it, saying we're working on the dynamics within our team here. We want to continue to progress as a team. It doesn't mean you're in difficulty. We want to continue to progress as a team. Which is the one that we should address? Which one could we easily address? That gives you your starting point. That gives you the in to kind of creating that environment that you need or you want. So what are some of the things then we can do? Let's talk about some practical things that we can do in terms of trying to create that environment and create that high performing team. Well, first and foremost, I think there's the whole thing about watching our language. We have a tendency to use language that's quite extreme and can polarize a little bit. We get it partly to the media because they have to shock to catch our attention, etc. We talk about things as being problems. Well, if we look at something as a problem, that puts us into a particular space. That traps our mind in a particular way. But some of the times we actually need to look at them more as puzzles. Because even if you think of the word puzzle, you're thinking about an outcome. You're thinking about it can be sorted, it can be fixed. Oh, that's challenging. Oh, that's interesting. A problem seems like that's a weight. So even watching our language and things, viewing them more as puzzles. How can we sort this out? And even when we use that, it's about inclusive, team together. How can we sort out this? This is a puzzle. How do we get to this place? What can we do about it? We also need to help employees with regard to their own. We talked about trying to engage people, about job satisfaction. We talked about that psychological safety, for the work to be meaningful for them. We need to help people understand their personal drivers. What is it that's motivating them? What is it, the drivers that are going on there? What's happening? And how do we map that then to the individual's role? How do we map it to what they need to achieve so they can see the link? Sometimes all of us just need to be reminded a little bit. Far away fields can always look greener. So we sometimes just need to be reminded and come back to where we are right now. It's also about creating that right culture within your team. And this is about managers taking the responsibility that I need to live those norms. So those 5 norms we talked about that we learned from Google, you know, am I the role model? Am I delivering on them? Am I demonstrating to the team that my work is meaningful, that I'm getting something from it, that I'm willing to create that environment, to take that risk, that create that psychological safety to take the risk, be the role model. Also too, it's not only about folks, and I think this is particularly for those of you working in hybrid or working remotely, we've a tendency to focus an awful lot on what we're doing, the results, what we're doing, have you delivered on that, is that completed? But we don't take the time out so much to talk about how we're actually doing that. And what we need to do is go back and revisit. How are things going? How are you finding it? You know, those simple little questions within the team. How are we now working better than we did a year ago? We're still in that remote or hybrid model. How is it now better than it was previously? What else can we do? I'm not saying we do this all of the time, but there has to be those moments of pauses with our team when we reflect on this, because high-performing teams don't happen accidentally. You can have accidental successes, but if you want to maintain it, it can't be based on accident. Or put it this way, if you're basing it on accident, what happens if the tides turn? You've nothing there, a solid foundation on which to build. And finally, recognize that managers need to recognize they don't have all the answers. Managers sometimes feel the weight of that I have to come up with the answers. But the important thing is ask the right questions. When I'm working with teams and managers and their development, I say 2 most critical skills you need as a manager. 1 is communication skills, and that's around active listening. The ability to ask questions are amazing. The power of a question. So ask the right question. Of course, the second thing I say to managers, the ability to delegate, because the work has to flow through you to others. They're skills that we need to develop. So this is what we need to start focusing on when we're talking about within our teams, with our changed world. So are there practical tools then that can help us with these? And there certainly are. In my experience in using the assessment tools, the TTI Success Insights tools, I have found them, they're really important because they do facilitate that self-awareness. And that self-awareness allows for emotional wisdom. And we know that emotional wisdom plays an important role in any team, for anybody within any organization. That's the part too that can grow with life's experiences. Unlike our IQ, that whatever we have, that's it. We just have to maximize it. And of course, emotional wisdom, well, I should ask you, how would you define emotional wisdom? What would you say it is? Now, don't be shy on me. Come on. Tricia, are you going to say something there?
Maybe you would say it's the lessons learned and internalized across your work span to date and your openness to continuous learning.
Very good, Tricia. Yeah. There's another element to it that we need to add. The emotional side. Because the emotional part is the part that sometimes can really get us into trouble.
Compassion and self-compassion.
What was that, Tricia?
Compassion and self-compassion.
Yeah, that plays a part of it. Yes, absolutely.
I think self-regulation as well, in terms of going back to the conflicts and the relationships.
Yeah, that self-regulation is an important element to it. So I recognize how I'm feeling emotionally. I'm able to label that, and then I'm able to regulate it and manage my relationships with others. And of course, we need that in any team. And through the assessment tools, we're able to understand that a little bit better. And as a result of that, we're also able to enhance our communication. We learn how to speak to others who are so different to us. And isn't that usually the biggest problems within teams? We talk about the clashes of personalities and hardened, because we don't appreciate where somebody else is coming from. We don't understand this is the way they view the world. This is their perspective. This is the way they are. And when we learn to understand that, we can figure out the language then to talk with them. Also, too, by the tools opens up that whole thing about trust and respect. And that leads to that area of the psychological safety. So it can help teams to understand. I now understand where you're coming from. Porrick and I are really very different people when we look at the assessment tools in terms of our behaviors and our driving forces. Very different. But in understanding that, we're able to find a way that we can talk together. We can find a way that we can trust each other. So his approach might be different to mine, and I might go, wait, that's excellent. I understand that. Not my way of doing it, but I get it. And I'd like to think that it's reversed too, that he can appreciate that Tricia is very strange in her way, but that's the way she is. And I can work with that, and it develops that trust and that respect.
You're not that strange, Tricia.
Oh, just very weird.
Just very
my
weird.
own weird ways, as we all do. As we all do. This, by using the information from the tools, it also can create that work environment where diversity and differences are appreciated. And I don't know about you in your work that you're doing now with different organizations, etc., but diversity is a very important issue. We're searching for ways to celebrate it. This is one clear way that we can do within our teams to recognize that diversity and what it brings to the table. And finally, the tools will facilitate building creativity and problem solving in new and different ways, which is hugely important. So they're tools that can help us with some of what we've outlined in terms of the challenges that we're facing. And I found them helpful. Have any of you found them helpful in any other ways? In a different way that I have referenced? I can see a lot of heads nodding. At least in my head, you're nodding. So that's great. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So
just before you move off it, Tricia, just to make one comment here. Up there, you talked about self-awareness, and you talked earlier back in the previous slide about matching people to their roles. And I read an article a number of years ago, a HBR article that I thought was very, very interesting. And it was talking about high-performing teams. I made a comment I thought was sort of, that struck me, I thought was sort of interesting. It said, they all have their heads down, they're all working hard. And I sort of thought that was an unusual kind of, I'm paraphrasing here, but that was an unusual kind of statement. And I said, because none of them are playing politics, because they all know what they're supposed to be doing. They've agreed what they're supposed to be doing. They're matched to their roles, and they're all down with their heads down. And maybe once a month or once a week, whatever, while I can't remember, they stick their heads up, they have a conversation with their heads down, the way you go again. Nobody was playing games because they all had this thing of trust. They knew what everybody was supposed to be doing. They knew what the team was supposed to try to accomplish, what each individual's role was, that each person, how they were matched to it and what they were doing to it. And this put a lot of trust. They didn't have to. Remember you talked about being afraid to put your head over the parapet and have your head up. They weren't afraid of that. They weren't afraid of that because they'd come to an agreement, if you wish, amongst them themselves as a team. Of what they were trying to accomplish, who was doing what, and then they were all putting their heads down, and they were able to say, I'm able to do this, I can't do this, because they knew their profiles, they knew their behaviors, their driving force, their competence, their EQ, and so on, and they knew what they could and could not do, and as a consequence, they sort of respected each other, understood each other, and were able then, as a consequence, to be a high-performing team. It's just, I remember it struck me very, very forcefully at the time, just a comment that they all had their heads down, delivering, because they weren't worrying about playing politics or protecting themselves or whatever.
That sounds like a very healthy environment, and that's what we're trying to create. Because Porrick was talking about there, the trust, etc. You know, this was some of the dysfunctions that we can see appearing in a team. And unfortunately, with dysfunctions, very often it's until they take a deep root hold, we don't even start to recognize them. So we need to try and avoid all of the dysfunctions that can really pull a team apart. This is Patrick Lencioni, I hope I pronounced that correctly, his work in terms of teams. And you'll see right down at the bottom of the triangle, supporting everything was the absence of trust. If you don't have trust in the team, everything else will start to collapse. And again, it's why the tools can help. It can help build that level of trust. It's one of the mechanisms, very, very helpful, powerful mechanism to help you to establish that trust within the teams. So I guess, Porrick, I wonder what for the group here,
Well, yeah, I'm gonna pop up a poll. I'm
Excellent.
going to ask everybody here to do this. So what I'm going to ask you to do is very, very simple. I want you to ask yourself right now, which of any of these you experience, yes or no, in your own organization? Absence of trust, have you experienced it? Yes or no. Fear of conflict, yes or no. Lack of commitment, yes or no. Avoidance of accountability, inattention to others. This is an anonymous poll, just so you know this. Nobody sees how anybody answers. We just get the total scores. So just in your own experience, in a working environment, have you experienced any of these? Yes or no? Okay. Last 2 seconds. Anybody who hasn't clicked, just click away there. Okay, here we go. And interesting results. What do you think, Tricia?
Yeah, what I'd be really interested to know, just if anybody was willing to share, again, you don't have to give details, but what was the impact of one of those that you saw, one of those dysfunctions? What was the impact that you saw of it? Because it's interesting, there isn't a single question there where there hasn't been the presence of one of those dysfunctions.
In fact,
we are encountering them, so I'm wondering what the impact was.
Yeah, in fact, serious number. I mean, if you look at it, 56% absence of trust, 56% fear of conflict, 56% lack of commitment, 67% avoidance of accountability. We all know that one for sure. And 56% inattention to results. And these are high scores.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I was wondering what the impact,
Yeah.
if anybody was willing to, without giving details, but just the impact that you noticed because of the presence of that particular dysfunction.
I think the fear of conflict one is interesting because, everyone thinks that collaboration is the holy grail, but don't really engage with the idea that part of that requires us to surface up and bubble up difference and have productive conversations around points of difference. And that also takes a lot of time. So whatever is driving the fear, whether it is that it's going to slow things down or it's going to, damage relationships or whatever, I think we need to engage with that. Real collaboration does surface difference and figure out how to help teams through that.
May I ask you, Ina, do you think that's an Irish cultural issue?
Yeah, I think there can be lots of reasons for it, I suppose, from personality to what people have seen and how the organization has responded previously to it, and what messages they're getting and what people are rewarded for.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of contributing factors to it. I agree with you, Ina. I think that if you don't have a confidence and the skill, I talked earlier on with regard to communication skills being critical, if you don't have the confidence and the skill to be able to communicate effectively, then you will suppress any kind of disagreement and you'll measure the team's success by we all get along really well.
Yes,
not recognizing, like any family, there's going to be disagreements. I mean, I don't know about your family, but I know with mine, there's definitely disagreement. That doesn't mean we don't love each other, we don't support each other, we're not a tight-knit family. It actually means we are, because we're able to have that disagreement and find our way out the other end. And that's so important within teams.
Well, Tricia, it's interesting, when they look at couples, research on couples, one of the defining characteristics of a marriage that's going to fail is they don't argue.
Yeah.
And the rationale behind that is they're not telling each other the truth. Fundamentally, that foundation of trust is undermined over time. And it's interesting, I remember, again, reading that article, and the case that people were made, particularly the men, when they were asked the question, why didn't they have the hard conversations, whatever it was, rather, they said, I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to upset her. I didn't want to upset the family. I didn't want to do whatever. Whereas we all know, of course, that putting it out there and having the conversations, be in our personal lives or our professional lives, putting it out there and having the conversations and get back to your slide way back on psychological safety, in a psychologically safe place where you're allowed to disagree, you're allowed to challenge. And you talked about walking the talk, about the leader actually having to role model this. I think this is the critical thing, is that they have to be willing, they genuinely have to be willing to encourage people to put it out there without fear of retribution, without fear of ridicule, without fear of whatever. So, yeah.
And interesting too, when you talk about that, about the marriage counselors, and don't worry, folks, we're not getting into marriages here in this room. But when you talk about it, the psychologists would also say it's actually very unhelpful for children not to witness parents who have disagreements. It's about how you handle it. So the child learns disagreement is a part of life, and there's a way to come, that disagreement come at the other end. We get to a positive resolution in the end. That's actually very important for children to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know, again, just to make a point, looking at behavioral styles, particularly, but also looking at driving forces, and understanding this language, the point that you made earlier, having this language allows you to have a conversation. So if you say to somebody, when you do this, or when this happens, or whatever, this is what I experience, and because I'm a this and you are a that. And when you have this shared language, it's very, very easy. I know when I'm debriefing somebody, one thing I love about debriefing somebody is I can sit down like this beside them, they're there beside me, we put something in front of us and we talk about what it's saying. And we have this common language. It's not about my opinion or somebody else's opinion, it's what it's saying. And I think when you have people who understand each other's profiles, they can have these conversations in a much more meaningful way. And you made the point earlier about you and me. We're very, very different people, and yet we get on really well. But we do have our moments, don't we? We have our moments when we're talking about something, and you think I'm a bit too sharp, because I am, or whatever. And you push back a little bit, and I say, okay, hang on a second. So we do have these little conflicts, but we know where it's coming from. And I know with all the people I work with, that is the case.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. We need to have the common language. We need to find a way to work our way through some of those difficult conversations and get out at the positive end of the other end of it. Now, at the start of the presentation today, the webinar today, we talked about the challenges, and now we've got to revisit them in light of what we've all talked about. Are there things then we can do to actually address them? So at the beginning, we talked about the employee engagement, the Gallup survey from 2018 about the 53%. So what can we do about this? Well, I suppose really and these are all little practical things. I said at the beginning, let's come up with practical, small things that we can do to help. So I suppose really one of the things is, having the regular one-to-one meetings, but ensuring as part of those meetings, we also add a sentence, a question around, how are you doing? That it isn't just about the work itself, but how are you doing? How are you getting on? It's your way to kind of get a window, a glimpse into what's happening for the person, and is there something you could do to support and address them? Also, too, by making sure that the employee has a clear line between the work that they're doing and the overall goals. If that's missing, if it's absent, something will go wrong. The work won't be right. The person will be feeling not important, not relevant. And I suppose the practical example I can recall of this is many years ago, I had reason to be in and out of Merlin Park Hospital here in Galway, in the unit that dealt with people who had pulmonary diseases. So very fragile individuals. And MRSA was the big thing at the time, and it was spreading everywhere. We had to be very, very careful with MRSA. So I remember walking in one day, and there was a young fellow there doing his job. He was mopping the floor. Now, he had his white shirt on, he had his black trousers, he had his safety boots on, he had the sign that says danger wet, he had his mop, and he had his bucket. So everything technically was right. He'd obviously been trained to do this correctly. And I watched him as he mopped the floor, because of course I was in a bit of a heightened state. And he had his mop and he was swinging it and he was looking around. And of course, me being me, I was tempted to go up to him and say, excuse me, do you realize it? And really tell him off and how the right way to do it. In fact, I probably would have taken the mop and brush and done the whole thing myself. And I paused for a second, and thankfully I did. Because actually what I realized, he wasn't at fault. He had been trained, he knew what to do, but somebody hadn't explained to him the value of his role and what he was doing, how important it was in protecting very vulnerable patients. There was no link between what he was doing and the goal at that time. That had been broken. If we don't create that context for people, people will feel their work is meaningless. And we saw from Google how important that is. Also, too, in terms of employee engagement, if there's opportunities to share feedback, be it from an external customer, an internal customer, a client, sharing that feedback is really important. Sometimes we just we're so busy, we miss that opportunity. So for employee engagement, can we share it back, be it in a team meeting or individual? The second one was that instability due to staff turnover. We need to understand, if we're to retain our existing staff members, we need to understand them. What drives them? What are their behaviors? What is it that's important to them? How do they like to work and function? What can we do to facilitate that even better? That's our ways to retain staff. Sometimes we look at things that are out of our control. We look to say, oh, we need to pay them more, but I can't do anything about them. Oh, I need to give them a promotion. I can't do anything about it. But the factors that motivate people very often are other issues that are within your control that you can contribute to. Because we all know that, of course, if we give somebody a pay rise, while it's sweet, it's short term in terms of the motivation. The longer term is enjoyment of my job. Do you facilitate that with me? So think about things like, what drives that employee? What do I know about them? How can I align that to their job? How can I ensure that they understand that this job is really satisfying, etc.? And again, how the tools can help with that.
Just want to make a point on that. I was talking to somebody just the other day, and she was talking about her role, PhD, interesting lady, and she hates her job. Now, why do you think that might be, Tricia? She's a PhD, and she hates her job.
Well, I'm guessing, well, there's a number of contributions, but it's not a sense of satisfaction from it. There's no recognition. Why do you it's not aligned to her drivers. It's not aligned to what she wants.
I think her primary driver is the PhD. What do you think her primary driver was from the driving?
Oh, it's knowledge.
Yeah, intellectual. And she said to me, there's no opportunity to learn here. And she just had 2 promotions. She just had 2 promotions, 2 pay rises, but there was no opportunity for her to learn.
Yeah.
And
if the organization could just understand that, just the conversation, just understanding about the person, look how simple it would be to actually create a very satisfying role for that individual and retain that person. Also, too, we talked about the information silos. So in this case, what we have to do as managers is be the role model. It's about you sharing information. It's not good enough when we share calendars and it just says busy. But if people can see things that people are working on, what is it that you're working on, that report or that body of work, whatever it may be. Also, too, in meetings when you're talking to your staff about what's happening, giving them updates, even if your project hasn't completed. Well, what are you working on? Giving, celebrating with the group, or marking or acknowledging when something has been worked on, the collaborative nature. So referencing something that was done and how the collaboration contributed to the success of that particular piece of work. It reminds people of the value and the importance of working together and how you found ways to make that happen. In terms of short-term thinking, it really is important that periodically, whether that's once a quarter, whatever it may be within the team that makes sense, is pulling our heads back up. With your reference, Pádraig, about the team working really, really closely and pulling the, thank you, Brian, pulling their heads back up and seeing the bigger picture. Linking it again to, where are we going to? And I know in this changing world where everything seems to be up in the air for a period of time, can we at least look to the next 6 months? What do we want to get done for the end of this year? Even giving that, even till September, giving them something more than just the immediate, because that's more gratifying for individuals. And then we take a look at those shifting goals. Well, my advice to people with regard to shifting goals is every so often we have to hit that pause button, pull it back and say, okay, goals have changed, right? We have to. Explaining the context or the rationale for the shifting of the goals. When knowledge, that information is shared, it's so important to people, as opposed to letting things just drift and assuming that people understand why we have to do that. We have to hit the pause and explain. And the last one that we talked about was about that personality, the clashes that are happening here. Well, I suppose on a practical level, first of all, I would strongly recommend I don't go into dealing with conflict unless I understand the person. Unless I've done the assessment tools, I can't do it properly. Understand it, meet with them and talk. And that brings us back to our very beginning with our team dynamics of what went on here, what went wrong in this situation. And we can blame everything that was happening. But, you know, from the beginning on the flight over where the team members were in the back of the plane, and the chiefs were in the front where there was greater space, leg room, etc., while the team were expected to play. And then they land in places on the training pitches. There were potholes, and of course, it's very dangerous for soccer players if they fell over. Thank you, Karen. They fell over, they break a leg, etc. There were no balls, believe it or not, to practice and soccer, get ready for a World Cup. No goalposts. In fact, in the end of one of the training sessions, the goalies left because they had no goalposts. And Roy Keane, of course, was furious they were leaving. Then after one of the practices, they all go on a night out, and Keane, of course, returns to his hotel room, furious about it. So what does he do? He airs it in public. He has an interview with Tom Humphreys of the Irish Times, and he follows that up with an interview with Paul Kimmage of the Irish Independent. And initially, the Irish Times weren't going to run with it. It was when they found out that Paul Kimmage, he'd spoken with Paul Kimmage, of course, they had to go. They were giving them this space to kind of sort this out. So everything is happening out in the public. So Mick McCarthy finds out from the media that Keane was going to retire from international football. You can imagine what that did to Mick McCarthy. And so, of course, he confronts Roy Keane. And that's when it all burst open. Because, of course, it wasn't understanding what's the best way to approach something like this. Understanding the person, I can figure a way around it. And instead, in this case, the team imploded, but managed to find a way to resurrect itself. So I'm hoping that has given you a little bit of insight into, you know, the challenges that we're facing right now in our changing world, and hopefully very practical suggestions of what you can do to try and either continue creating that really strong team that you have, or address some of the challenges that you might be encountering. So thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure. So I'd open it up to some questions or discussion.
That was wonderful, Tricia. Really, really, really good. Thank you very, very much. Okay, Q&A. Anybody, any questions you want to ask?
Tricia, one of the things I'm working on with organizations is around belonging. So how do we create a differentiated employment experience when everyone's working virtually? So someone else's virtual role when I'm sitting in my home office could feel very similar to what working virtually for this team, you know, looks like, feels like. So I think you've touched on a lot of really good things, you know, reminders around anchors, but I'm just wondering, is there anything else from your research that you could signpost for me in that space around what builds belonging as kind of powerful anchors for retention?
That's a really good question, Ina. And my starting point always is to ask the question of the team. My starting point is with the team. What will give you a greater sense of belonging? What will help us as a team to feel that sense of we belong to something that's really unique or special or important? Ask the team and see what they come up with. It's a great starting point, and it opens up the discussion. Thanks, also, too, they're coming up with a solution, and when the solutions come from the team, it's owned and it's more likely to be implemented and supported longer term. That would be my suggestion for a starting point.
Interesting, Ina. I saw a piece of research on that actually, where the onboarding process, obviously that's not for an existing team member, it's for a new team member, but the onboarding process was considered to be critical. And the feedback that people gave was that when they went through a proper onboarding process, i.e. take, for example, when they had their psychometrics and the boss's psychometrics compared and debriefed together, or when they had a clear development plan coming out of a gap report prepared, and so on and so forth. And take Tricia's point, when they saw the line between their role and the goals and objectives of the organization, when that was presented to them, that these things, like the onboarding process. In fact, I remember, I think the comment I read at the end of it, they actually quoted people who had been interviewed as part of the research. And one person said that the confidence they had in the organization and the way it would treat them and what their career would look like, because they were onboarded so professionally. So I think well begun is half done. We know the expression, but again, that's for new team members. Obviously, it's not for existing team members. I have one question to come in here, Tricia, and it just came in here to me personally. And the question is, okay, So yeah, a practical example of something you're experiencing right now in terms of team dynamics, a client you're working with and something that's happening right now that is a consequence of, well, they didn't say COVID, but they mean this remote working. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm working with an organization, a group of really good individuals, professional services, an expanding organization, very dynamic, etc. And within the team, it seemed to be nearly like split in two. So we have two very strong individuals, and then we had three individuals who are finding it more difficult to get their voice heard. And so what we did with them is we did the psychometric testing for the teams to figure out what was actually really happening here, what's going on, because it seemed to the ones who were more timid or quieter, the others were trying to dominate and prove that they were stronger and pushing through and weren't tolerant of some of the suggestions that were coming forward or the conversations that need to happen. And it was really exciting and really good to do it, where the team could recognize, actually, it's about the way I am. It's who I am as an individual. This is where I come from. So we looked at the behaviors, we looked at the driving forces behind it, and we followed it up with another session to say, okay, now that you understand all the information, how do I plan it? How do I apply that? So what's the value I bring? So we conducted that lovely exercise about the value and the challenges others might encounter as a result of me, me being this way. And it really opened eyes up. And what I found really interesting in the follow-up session, those who were quieter found their voice because it validated that this is who I am and it's okay to be this way. And meanwhile, the others who seemed the stronger ones, they felt validated too, because they were like, well, this is who I am. I'm not trying to force something. It's just who I am, the way I tend to operate or function. So it was really, really powerful. And they are using it in terms of, as I said, they're expanding, hiring on other people so they'll understand and help them. You use the word onboarding. So help them when they come in to settle into the team as quickly as and effectively as possible. So I found it very helpful in that situation.
Okay, we'll wrap it, Tricia, if that's okay with you, unless anybody has any particular question. I'm just conscious of time. We've gone 8 minutes over our allotted time. I apologize to everyone, but when Tricia gets going, and she's a lot of interesting, a lot of it was wonderful. It was wonderful to listen to you, Tricia.
Well, I always say to my groups, I apologize in advance. I'm a bit of a windbag. And when I'm passionate about something, as I am about this topic, I can go on forever.
Yeah.
So I do apologize. One question can lead to me going on forever.
And
of course, thank you. I really appreciate your interaction today. It was really helpful, really good.
Yeah, and I keep interrupting, of course, which doesn't help.
You do.
There you go. But that's my style as well, isn't it? Okay, everybody, thank you very much for participating. This is recorded, of course. It'll be posted up on LinkedIn. It's available to anybody to share. So thanks very much, and really appreciate it, Tricia. Thank you very, very much for an excellent webinar.
You're welcome. Thanks, Paul. Take care, everybody.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.